One of the central tenets of American society is that every American citizen, every individual has certain rights to which they are entitled. This is embedded in the very fabric of American history. The Declaration of Independence, ironically, the Declaration of Independence declares that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created with certain unalienable rights. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The United States Constitution, the first 10 amendments, are called the Bill of Rights, and they guarantee certain rights to American citizens, among which are the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, the rights to due process, and many other rights that are guaranteed in our Constitution. Our court system, finds at various times, declares that there are certain rights that people cannot trample upon, that these are inherent rights to individuals. And recently, in recent years, our society has begun to identify and declare rights that people have that no one dare trample upon. And the way that American society works is that we guard our rights very, very tightly. And if someone were to begin to infringe upon our rights, we refuse to stand by because that is just an unforgivable offense. And so we stand up, we speak out, we refuse to stand idly by and allow our rights to be trampled upon because we as American citizens believe that we hold certain rights. This morning we're going to be looking at a passage that Jesus talks about how we are to view our rights when we are citizens of heaven. He says we don't look at our rights as American citizens, we look at our rights as citizens of heaven. And Jesus says something that is going to be kind of difficult for most American ears to hear. Jesus says that we should be less concerned with what we feel like we deserve. We should be less concerned with our rights, with getting our due, than we should be with loving other people. And so that's what we talk about this morning. And we're going to talk about Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 48. And again, this is a very famous passage. There's a lot of phrases that have found their way into the everyday vernacular of American society. But the message of what Jesus is saying, I don't think is so familiar. The words are, but I think Jesus' message is radical and countercultural. And I think that was kind of his point. Now, as we've been going through Matthew 5, we've seen that the way that Jesus approaches a lot of these things throughout the Sermon on the Mount here is he starts by saying, you have heard that it was said, and he tells them an Old Testament law that they were all familiar with and they all feel like they understood. And then he says, okay, now we're going to go a little bit deeper with this. This is what I say to you. I want you to understand this law at a deeper level. And this morning, in the passage that we're going to look at, Jesus does that with two separate commands, and we're going to look at both of them this morning. And the first command that he talks about is found in verse 38. And this is what Jesus says. You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, again, this is probably something that you have heard before, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. And this is what's known in theological circles or historical circles as the lex talionis. That's fancy Latin for the law of retaliation. And the lex talionis is one of those things that people kind of look at with derision now. People look at that and they say, well, what a gruesome way to handle justice, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But what we have to understand is the lex talionis was actually a step in the right direction for ancient societies. Because human nature is such that we want to hurt someone more than they hurt us. You know, someone hurts us and we go, I'm going to make them pay. I'm going to make them hurt even more than what they did to me. And the lex talionis said, no, you aren't allowed to make someone hurt more than what they hurt you. The most that you can do is make them hurt equal to what they hurt you. And so it's this idea already of trying to rein in this human tendency to retaliate to people. And this became a real problem, in ancient societies because what might happen was someone from one tribe attacked an individual from another tribe. And so the other tribe responded by sending a group of people to go attack the other tribe. And the next thing you know, it was all-out war, and sometimes it was all-out genocide. The lex talionis was this idea that said, listen, if someone gouges out your eye, the most that you can do to them is gouge out their eye. You can't go kill them because they took out your eye. All you can do is to knock out their eye. If someone knocks out your tooth, you can't go beat them up. You can't go break their arm. The most that you are allowed to do would be to go and knock out their tooth. And so it's not nearly as gruesome as we tend to think about. It's really an exercise in restraint and in restraining the human condition. Now, the Israelites had this same law on their books, and it was given in the Old Testament by God, and they functioned by this. But one of the things that the Israelites had to understand was that this law was not intended to be applied by individuals. It was not allowed for me to decide, you had knocked out my tooth, therefore I can go and knock out your tooth. The lex talionis, this eye for eye, tooth for tooth idea, was really to only be used by the judges of Israel. It was a sentencing guideline for the court system. And so what happened was the judges in Israel came to realize that doing this literally probably didn't work very well, because if you knock out one of my teeth, how can we be sure that I'm going to cause the same amount of injury to you if I knock out one of your teeth? You know, if I've only got one tooth, that's a lot bigger injury for me to lose that one tooth than for it is to you to lose one of your 30, or however, I don't know how many teeth people have. But, you know, you may have 30, I don't know. But the idea here was, they said, you know, or what if you knocked out a tooth that was abscessed? Well, then you're kind of doing me a favor. Like, thanks, you know, I appreciate you knocking me that. And so how do we respond to that? What's the appropriate response? And over time, what happened was the Jewish leaders said, you know, probably it's better to try and come up with some sort of other damages, something that is not a physical punishment, but rather a financial or some other service kind of punishment. And so they would try and think about, you know, what are all the ways that this has affected them, and how do we compensate them to make sure that the punishment is equal to the crime. Now, what's interesting, that's basically how our justice system works today, isn't it? That you commit a crime, and the idea here is that we want to punish the person in proportion to the hurt that they have caused. And so this is this idea that the Jewish people had. As Jesus talks about, he says, listen, you have heard the law that says eye for eye and tooth for tooth. The people understood this. They looked at it like this, that this was an idea of saying justice must be served. The punishment must fit the crime. If you commit the crime, then someone is going to have to do the time, as we might say today. This was the mindset that the Israelites would have had. And so Jesus now plays on this. He says, you know this law, but here's what I say to you. In verses 39 and following, he says this, but I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. So Jesus says, listen, you know that the law says we can demand justice. If someone wrongs you, then you have every right to go after them and make sure that justice is served. He says, here's what I tell you. Sometimes it's not worth trying to seek justice. Really, it's often better to extend grace. And he gives 4 examples of this. And each of these examples are kind of foreign to us, so I want to walk through them real quick here and explain what he's talking about. The first example is turn the other cheek. And again, this is a phrase that is very familiar in our society. We talk about this all the time. I need to turn the other cheek. But what we have to understand is what this meant in Jesus' time. That when he said, turn the other cheek, it says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, I didn't know this until this past week when I was doing some research on this. The whole right cheek thing is significant. I just thought Jesus was right-handed and, he picked a cheek. No, think about it. If you're a right-handed person, which most people are, sorry you lefties, you're wrong. A right-handed person, my wife is left-handed, so I can say that, I guess. But if a right-handed person were to smack you on the right cheek, how do they do that? They can't come at you this way and smack you on the right cheek. The only way to smack someone on the right cheek with a right hand is with a backhand, right? You can backhand someone across and hit them on the right cheek. Now, this in Jewish society was an ultimate insult. It was not merely a physical attack on a person. It was an insult that said, listen, you are worthless. You don't matter. You are wrong. You are a lowlife. So Jesus was saying, listen, if someone gives you a backhanded slap, don't go. This was something that you could go to court over. I mean, you could take someone to court over that kind of a slap. He says, turn to him the other also and say, okay. He's saying we shouldn't retaliate. Even though we may have the right to do so. When someone attacks us, when someone, whether it's physically, whether it is emotionally, whether it is any other way, he says sometimes it's better for us to not retaliate, even though we would be perfectly justified in doing so. So he says, turn the left cheek as well. So that's the first example. The second example is to give your coat. He says, if you are sued in court for your shirt and it's taken from you, then give your coat as well. And this is, again, very foreign to us. But you need to understand that Jewish people at that time had a couple of different layers of clothing. They would have an inner layer of clothing known as a tunic, or here called a shirt. And then they would have an outer layer of clothing, which was called a cloak or a coat. And the law said that you could take a tunic, but you couldn't take a cloak as part of the law. That even if the court said that you owed someone their cloak, they would have to give it back to you each night. And the reason was this: the cloak was a very expensive piece of clothing. It was considered an essential piece of clothing. It provided protection from the elements. It provided a blanket. It was used to carry stuff. It was an essential piece of clothing, and you weren't allowed to deprive someone of their cloak. And so when Jesus says, listen, if someone takes from you your tunic, give to them also your cloak, he was saying, nobody's allowed to take that from you, but you can give it up. He said, don't be so concerned with your rights. Don't be so concerned with making sure that no one can put you out or make life hard for you that you turn people away. And he says, sometimes it's better to allow ourselves to be inconvenienced, to allow ourselves to experience hardship in order to show love to another person. The third example he uses is he says, go the extra mile. Again, this is a phrase that has become part of our common vocabulary, but it's lost a little bit of its richness and meaning from that time. At that time, the Jewish people were under rule by Rome. The Roman Empire had come and they had conquered Israel, and so they were an occupying force in Israel. As a result, there's Roman soldiers all over the place. And Roman soldiers had a tendency to not exactly be the kindest, gentlest guys in the world. They kind of ruled by force, ruled with an iron fist. And one of the rules in Rome was that if a Roman soldier told you to do something, you just had to do it. There wasn't anything about it. And so they could command you to go and carry their pack for them up to 1,000 paces, or roughly about a mile. And so they could say, you, pick my stuff up and let's go. It didn't matter what you were doing. If you were a Jew and you had to stop what you were doing, leave whatever you were doing, pick up that Roman soldier's stuff and go. Now, this is unfair. It's ridiculous. It's disrespectful. And the Jews hated it, understandably. Jesus says, if a Roman soldier comes to you and tells you to pick up his pack and carry it for a mile, carry it for 2. He can't make you carry it for 2. He can only make you carry it for 1. But go that extra mile. Carry it further. Go above and beyond the call of duty. But that's not fair. I know. But it's grace. It's love. And that's what I want you to do. That's what Jesus was saying to them, and it's what he's saying to us too. And the fourth example that he gives is he says that we should be generous to those in need. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. And again, we are supposed to be generous. Now, I don't think that what Jesus is saying here is that we should be enablers. We shouldn't give to people who are abusers of the system, shall we say. We shouldn't give to people who are unwilling to work a job. There's a difference between unable to work and unwilling to work. And Jesus is saying we shouldn't enable people to be lazy. We shouldn't enable people to continue to make poor financial decisions. If someone is being foolish with their money, we shouldn't continue to enable them. However, our tendency as human beings is when someone asks for money to immediately try and think of all the reasons why we can't give it to them, to immediately try and think of excuses for why that's unreasonable for us to do. And Jesus is saying, no, I want you to turn the other way, and I want you to think differently. Try and look for ways to say yes to people. Look for ways to meet other people's needs, rather than looking at people and saying, well, that's not my problem, or, I really can't do that. It says, your default position should be one that says, yes. Sometimes you can't, but generally speaking, he said, look for ways to say yes to other people. So Jesus is giving these examples to us. These are merely some examples of this principle that he's trying to teach us. And I think the principle that he's trying to teach us is this: don't be selfish. Get over yourself. See, the problem that we have is we have a tendency to look inward. We get so focused on ourselves and our rights and what is our due. And Jesus says we need to be less concerned about what we think people owe us. And we need to look past ourselves to see others, to meet their needs, to do things for them, even if it's unfair to us. He said it's not about our fairness. And I made a list of some ways that this might play out, that we might actually begin to kind of do this. It says, some examples here. When someone says something mean to us, it means that we don't say something mean in return. Instead, either we hold our tongue, or, believe it or not, we might actually look for a way to be kind in the face of unkindness. It means that we don't try to give someone a taste of their own medicine. This is a hard one, because we like to do that, don't we? This is that retaliation. Someone leaves a mess around the house, and so you go, I'm not going to clean it up. I'm going to leave a mess where they see it, and they're going to see it, and they'll know exactly how it feels. That's this retaliation. That's not grace. Or, someone is being disrespectful to me. I feel unappreciated, so you know what? I'm just going to ignore them, and that way they'll know exactly how it feels. It's this law of retaliation. We need to take an approach that says, listen, I realize that I feel like my rights are being trampled upon, but that doesn't mean that I should trample on other people's rights. Instead, I should show them grace, and I should love them, even if I don't feel like they deserve it. It means that we serve others with joy rather than serving grudgingly. Listen, we've all got things that we'd rather not do. We've got things that we are made to do that, quite frankly, we resent. And it's not enough to just do those things, because there's more than one way to do things. You've seen this in your kids, right? You tell them to do something, and you see them, okay, and they go do it, and it's loud as, okay, they're stomping through the room doing that. And of course, as grown-ups, we would never do that because we are so much more mature than small children, or not. But we do that, don't we? Well, I'm going to do this. But I'm going to do the bare minimum. I want to make it clear that I am not happy. Jesus says, no, go above and beyond. Do it to the best of your ability. Do it whole hog. Yeah, but it's not fair. It doesn't matter if it's fair. Go do what you need to do, and do it to the best of your ability. Serve with joy. It means that we choose to be generous rather than being selfish. See, we need to look for ways that we can give to others instead of looking for ways to try and keep things for ourselves. We need to look for opportunities to give, whether that's money, whether it's possessions, whether it is time or services or skills, whatever it might be. We need to be people who are trying to be generous, people who are looking for excuses to give rather than for excuses to hoard. Now, admittedly, this is a radical teaching. It flies in the face of everything that our society holds dear. But I kind of think that's the point. I think what Jesus is saying is, listen, you are citizens of heaven. You aren't citizens of the world anymore. You belong to me. And so you need to behave as citizens of heaven. Don't behave like citizens of the world. Yeah, the citizens of the world say, this is normal. People owe us. People can't trample on my rights. And Jesus says, listen, your rights aren't that important here. You've got an inheritance that no one can touch. You know that I've got your back. I'm going to take care of you. Justice will be served. He's telling us that we need to live differently because we serve a God who loves differently and who has changed us, and we have an inheritance that no one can take from us. So that was the first command. And the first command is a very difficult one. Unfortunately, the second command is really not any easier. Listen to what Jesus says in verses 43 and following. He says, you have heard the law that says love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. And that way you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good. And he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. So Jesus starts with this command, and he says, you've heard the command that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, if you go look that up, you find that the Old Testament just says, love your neighbor. But the Jews understood it this way because they would ask this question, who is my neighbor? And later on, we see in Luke, someone asks Jesus about that, and he tells him the story of the Good Samaritan to illustrate this point. Some of the people didn't get the answer to the question, but that's what the whole idea of the Good Samaritan was. But the people in that time had come to understand this. The Jewish leaders had come to understand this question of who is my neighbor as your neighbor is your fellow Jew. And so you should love your fellow Jew. Non-Jews should be treated like the outsiders that they are. They shouldn't be loved. They should be treated as the outsiders that they are. So this is where this idea of love your neighbor and hate your enemy comes from. That's not what God said. As a matter of fact, throughout the Old Testament, it kind of seems to say the opposite of that. But that's the way that the people understood this command, that practically speaking, it was to love your neighbor and hate your enemy. So that's why Jesus puts this command to them that way, because that's what they understood. That's how they understood this command. And so he says, I tell you something different, though. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. He totally flips the command on its head. And he gives this example. He says, we are supposed to love our enemies because that's what God does. God doesn't show partiality in his love. He shows genuine kindness and love to everyone. He causes the sun to shine on good people and bad people alike. He brings rain on people who are good and bad. I mean, wouldn't it be interesting if that wasn't the way that it was worked? Like you could go out when it was raining and you could drive by certain fields and see who were the good people and not, because you walk by, oh, there's the property. Oh, God's mad at them. That's not how it works. Sometimes we wish it was, although the problem is we'd all be in a drought. But, we have to be careful what we wish for. But he says, God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. He blesses the good and the bad. He doesn't show partiality. He doesn't deal with us merely on the basis of who we are or how we treat him. He says, and you should do the same. You need to show love to other people. Now, we have to think about love differently because we need to love like God does. And he gives this example. He says, look, the world, everybody loves people who are nice to them. Like, it's really easy to love people who you like. It's really easy to love people who love you back. It's not so easy to love people who are not nice to you. It's not easy to love people who hate you. It's not easy to love people who have no way or no inclination to love you back. We tend to show love when there's something in it for us. But Jesus says that's not what love is. Biblical love is not a feeling. We have a tendency to feel like, well, I don't feel loving towards that person, so I can't love them. I have to feel loving towards them. Love is not a feeling, it is a choice. And that's, I think, one of the issues that we see with marriage in our country is that we feel this way, that we go, I don't feel in love. We've fallen out of love. Love is a choice. We choose to show love to other people. We say, well, what do you mean? I'm supposed to act loving. I'm supposed to put on a show. I'm supposed to pretend that that I feel love for this person when I don't. No, but we are supposed to show love. We are supposed to act loving towards other people, regardless of how we feel. Love is a choice. And here's what happens. Often, when we choose to act loving, when we choose to show that love to other people when we don't feel like it, God begins to change us. He begins changing our hearts, and suddenly we soften towards other people. And suddenly the feelings kind of start to come, and things begin to change. And it's amazing how obedience to God does that. C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, had a great quote, and he said this better than I ever could. So let me read you what he said. He says this. Well, let me find the quote here. He says, "The rule for all of us is perfectly simple. Do not waste your time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you loved someone, you will presently come to love him. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking him more. If you do him a good turn, you will find yourself disliking him less. The worldly man treats certain people kindly because he likes them. The Christian, trying to treat everyone kindly, finds himself liking more and more people as he goes on, including people he could not have imagined himself liking at the beginning." Isn't that a radical idea? That part of the reason that we don't like other people is because we haven't tried to show love to them. And when we love them, it's amazing what God does in our own hearts. Now that's radical. It's hard. Because again, we have this idea that love is a feeling. But we need to look at it differently. We need to understand that we love because God has loved us. When we start loving other people, we have a tendency to look past them and we no longer see them as enemies. We begin to see them as people. We begin to see them as people who have needs, people who have insecurities, people who are really not that much different from us. And suddenly we begin to show compassion toward them, and we begin to feel loving feelings toward them. And amazingly, we may even become their friends. It's hard to believe, but it's funny how God works in that way. He says that we are to love our enemies. So who are our enemies? Well, I'm glad you asked because I have another list. Our enemies might be someone who isn't a Christian, someone who is outspoken in their opposition of Christianity and Christians in general. Our enemies might be someone who holds an opposing political or ideological view than we do. It might be the person who seems arrogant, careless, or foolish. It might be the person who is mean and unloving towards us, the one who tramples on our so-called rights. It might be the person who makes us look bad, whether that's intentionally, whether it is through slander, or whether it is just because they're better at something than us. We have a tendency to look at that person as an enemy. It might be the person who we feel doesn't deserve the blessings that they have. Or it might be the person who cannot or will not love us back, because it's hard to love when we feel like there's nothing in it for us. See, we've got all sorts of people that we might, that might fit this category of enemies, but we are supposed to love them anyway. So how do we do that? Well, I have another list here of some examples. Maybe it means that we show love to someone by mowing the lawn or shoveling the driveway of that neighbor who is just mean to us. They're constantly complaining. They never have anything nice to say. We go, I'd rather just avoid them. Jesus says, no, show love. Look for ways to honor them. Maybe it means trying to sit down and genuinely take an interest in the life of someone who stands for something you disagree with. And here's what I mean by that. Take them out to lunch or whatever, and don't talk about that issue. Don't try and start an argument. Don't try and change them. Try to know them as a human being. Because it's easy to marginalize people when we identify them as an idea. Once we get to know them as a person, it becomes much harder to simply push them to the side, and we actually begin to love them. Maybe it means that instead of rejoicing when someone we don't like has something bad happen to them, maybe we should pray for them and ask that God would strengthen them. God would make himself real to them, asking God to give them what they need in order to make it through that trial. It's really hard to stay bitter with someone when you're praying for them. Maybe it means that we look for ways to highlight the good traits in those people who drive us nuts, the people we think are arrogant, the people who we think are insecure or obnoxious. If we start trying to highlight the good traits in their lives, maybe we will begin to look at them differently and they will feel our love. Maybe it means offering to help someone when you know that they have a need, even though you know if the tables were turned, they probably wouldn't do the same for you. You see, what we need to do, and what I think Jesus is telling us, is that we love our enemies by seeing the need that they have, seeing them as a person, seeing them as a human being, and saying, I'm going to meet your need. Now, for some people, it may mean that we have to start by simply not retaliating, by not being mean to them, and by being neutral to them. But we also need to take that next step and say, I want to start trying to show love. They may not change, but I can pretty well guarantee you, you will. You might even find that you come to like them. Funny how that works. Jesus gives these commands here. And I don't know why they've become part of our society, because they're really hard. He says that we are not to retaliate, and instead we are to show grace. And he says that we are to love our enemies. We are to love people even when there's nothing in it for us, even when it's probably not going to be returned to us. He says we are to love like that. And we go, that's impossible. Yep, it is. Because for the regular human being, for human beings, we have no concept of this because it's totally foreign to us. Nobody loves that way. No human being loves like that. God loves like that, though. And as Christians, we are able to love like that because we have been loved like that. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says as he describes that kind of love from God. And this is in Romans 5. And verses 6 through 8 says this: When we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners. Now, most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, though someone might perhaps be willing to die for a person who's especially good. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. You want the perfect example of love your enemies? There it is. We are enemies of God. We stood opposed to God, and Jesus came and died for us. He loved us in a way that we are supposed to love other people. He lived this perfectly. You see, that's the kind of love that we were supposed to show to others, which is the love that Jesus has shown to us. And the hope is that when we show that kind of love to other people, it is so radical, it is so different from what the world does that people begin to ask questions. People begin to look and say, I want to know that kind of love. And we can introduce them to Jesus, who loves perfectly, and they can experience it for themselves. You see, here's the problem. We live as citizens of the world. We have fallen into the trap of living just like the rest of the world, and we have adopted the tactics of the world. Let me ask you a question. How's that working for us? It doesn't accomplish much, does it? So instead of following the pattern of the world, maybe we should start trying to follow the pattern of Jesus Christ as he commands us to do. And if we'll do that, hard telling what he may do in response. So let's pray together. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for the love that you show to us. If we are honest with ourselves, we understand that we do not deserve your love at all. We deserve nothing but condemnation. That would be justice. That would be fair. But in the face of deserved condemnation, you have given us grace. You have given us love. Lord, we pray that you would help us to keep that perspective in mind as we encounter the difficult people that we surely encounter each day of our lives. Help us to be people who live lives of grace. Help us not to retaliate, even though we might feel justified in doing so, but to extend grace. And Lord, help us to show love like you have shown to us, even when it feels like there's nothing to be gained from it in our place. Help us to love anyway. Help us to love like you. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.